Hey, it is Xennial Gamer, and this is Shaquila. For those of you guys who have not been on one of my streams, Shaki decided to hang out with me while I was recording today, so I thought I'd throw on the puppy cam. She's full of energy today, guys. You can see, didn't even react when I did my intro. All right, guys. So anyway, today we're going to be talking about runes, and specifically we're going to be talking about runes by slot and which runes you guys may or may not be selling, which you should or should not be selling. So I've been talking about this video on stream actually coming out for a couple of weeks, and it was kind of a good thing that the video did not get recorded until right after the recent Reddit post where we found out that the formula for crit rate is not exactly what we all thought it was. So I do want to start off by addressing that. Hey guys, we're going to use a different background because I actually, I recorded this video about a week ago. And it was right after the Reddit post telling us that the crit rate bug existed, and before Com2Us had verified that it was a bug. And told us that it was going to be fixed. So at the time of this re-recording of this integration, the bug has not been fixed yet, but we've been told it'll be fixed on the 6.24 update, so probably coming in about 2 weeks. And in the original video, I kind of just gave my same thoughts all the other creators gave as to I wasn't planning to re-rune my monsters. I wanted to hear what Com2Us said. I believed it was a bug, blah, blah, blah. All the stuff that all the creators basically said, right? So I fully expected Com2Us to say it would be fixed. I am extremely glad that they took action on it so quickly. I know a lot of people are upset. Me personally, I know that software development is one of the most complicated jobs in the world. I mean, you're talking about probably hundreds of millions of lines of code, and it's not like you're writing a poem or a short story or something. Code is like incredibly specific syntax. Bugs are going to happen, and it sucks that this bug happened, but bugs are going to happen. It's really hard to identify them, and the reality is there's something like 500,000 of us who play this game, and in 4 years of people saying, oh, this sucks, I missed a crit, I got too many crits, I crit miho, I always crit miho, whatever complaints we all have. We're video gamers, we all complain, right? So whatever bad beat stories we had, in 4 years, not one of us ever thought to just go out and test, because it was really simple for the people who cracked this to test it. You do a few hundred test runs, you count the crits. It wasn't that complicated. So I think we all share some responsibility there. To me, I'm just glad that it was found and that it's going to be fixed, and we move forward and don't look back. That's kind of how I view most things. So with that said, I just want to throw out, I think that this video gained even more importance, or at least the portions of this video where I talked about the crit rate runes, those gain even more importance. Because if you're somebody who's kind of gone on for a long time with like, I've got 50 crit rate and a crit damage slot 4, and that's probably good enough, you were benefiting, unknowingly, I'm sure, but benefiting majorly from this bug that's about to be fixed, and this is a video that's really worth paying attention to. So with that said, we're going to go back to the previously recorded video, guys. I hope you enjoy it. I think this is maybe one of the more important concepts that I've tried to put into a video. So hope you guys enjoy the video. Back to it. I've been talking for a couple of weeks about how I was going to do a video talking about the value of crit rate runes. Now you can see my Van Cliff here. The premium LD5 that I just pulled a couple of weeks ago, so I had to take this chance to flex, right? But besides that, you can tell by his stats that he's on a crit rate slot 4. Most of the monsters that I value the most are actually on crit rate slot 4s, at least in the current meta. Not all of them. There's exceptions, and we're going to talk about that. But many of them are. Okay, so with that said, it looks like Shaki is waking up. We're going to take a quick cookie break for Shaki, and then we're going to start talking about runes. You're on camera, puppy. You want a cookie? There's my girl. There's my girl. Shaki, shake. Shaki, shake. Good girl. Good girl. All right, Shaki. One more. Okay, can you catch for the camera? Guys, until a year ago, she never would have missed that catch. Alright, it looks like she's more interested in doing things that should be off camera, so we're going to turn off the puppy cam now. I just wanted to take a chance while she was hanging out with us. Alright, so we are going to move now into what was originally planned for this video. We're kind of going to go slot by slot, so I am going to talk about crit rate, accuracy, and resistance runes. There should be a chapter list, so you can always skip forward if you want, but there are some important things that I think a lot of people overlook on the other slots as well. So I'd like to start off just by talking about slot 1 runes. Okay, so you guys can see that right here I have filtered by all runes, and then I have sorted by defense percent, and no runes are popping up, right? If I do the same thing by defense plus, no runes will pop up, and also, by the way, if I sort by attack plus, no runes will pop up. On the other hand, if I sort by speed, 373 runes pop up. Now, most of you probably already know this, but if you're an earlier game player or if you didn't know it, you cannot get defense on a slot 1 rune. You cannot get attack percent on a slot 3 rune. You also cannot get flat attack on a slot 1 rune because that's the main stat of the rune. You cannot get flat defense on a slot 3 rune because that's the main stat. And you cannot get flat HP on a slot 5. For your slots 2, 4, and 6, you just can't get whatever the main stat is on that rune. So in this case, I can't have crit rate on a crit rate rune, I can't have accuracy on an accuracy rune, and so forth. Now, the reason that I go through this is because I think it's really important, first and foremost, to talk about how we build our monsters. Now, historically in Summoner's War, we've always said, how do you build Monster X? How do you build Barbara? Oh, you put her on speed, crit damage, attack. How do you build Van Cliff? Oh, you put him on speed, crit damage, HP. How do you build Diana? HP, crit rate, HP, whatever. The point is, it's like a shorthand. We tell you what the slot 2, 4, 6 runes should be, and then you build your monster that way. But especially as runes have evolved, as B12s have come out, and as the game's just gotten older and we've gotten better runes, the whole concept of runes should be more fluid for most of us. Now, I am actually using Van Cliff specifically because if I asked somebody how to build Van Cliff, they probably would have told me, go speed, crit damage, attack, and get HP, accuracy, and crit rate in subs. And instead, I'm actually on speed, crit rate, accuracy. But if you asked me how to build Van Cliff, I would have told you, shoot for 170k effective HP, shoot for at least 85 crit rate, shoot for at least 85 accuracy with artifacts, and get as much crit damage through subs and artifacts as you can, and get a lot of attack and defense through subs. So the point of this is that we shouldn't be locked into the concept that you must use speed or HP or attack runes in a certain slot. We should be focused more on achieving specific target stats for our monsters. Just like when it comes to speed, if I told you a monster had to be plus 120, you would probably check your builds first with a speed slot 2, but it may turn out that you could use an HP or an attack slot 2 and get lots of speed on that monster with subs. So I think this is a concept that a lot of us have gotten used to with speed over time. And so we're gonna look at this Odin as an example. You see my Odin, he's plus 142. Now obviously this is a premium rune set, but if you look at my slot 2 attack, it's got a 30 speed sub. Now, if this rune was a slot 2 speed with say 45% attack, I would have 12 more speed and 18% less attack. Basic math, right? I know that seems pretty straightforward, but the point is, if I only had 12 more speed and I only had 18 less attack, then maybe on my slot 1, I would be able to use a rune that had 13 speed but 32 attack. So realistically, I could go with a high attack, low speed slot 1 plus a speed slot 2, or I can go with a high speed, low attack slot 1 plus an attack high speed slot 2. The point is that it doesn't matter what the primary stat is on any rune, because these days, if you've been farming a lot, especially if you're a mid-late game player or a late game player and you've got lots of runes and they're all gemmed and they're all grinded, you can make your stats with almost any slot 2, 4, 6. So the point is not what 2, 4, 6 you should use. The point is, what stat targets should you shoot for? Now, along these lines, now I want to throw out one quick analogy. One of my all-time favorite books is Ender's Game. Some of you have probably read it, so for those of you who haven't, just skip ahead on the chapter or listen to the explanation. So in the book Ender's Game, and also in the movie, it's a bunch of kids who are basically going to a space military school. They're like geniuses. They're the smartest kids in the world, and the smartest of all of them, or the second smartest of all of them if you read the books later, is this kid Ender Wiggins, who is a military genius. So they're playing these like war games in zero gravity, and all the other kids see the enemy's gate as straight in front of them, but because they're in 0G, that causes them to orient themselves in a way where they're vulnerable. So Ender, realizing that in zero gravity it doesn't matter which way you orient yourself, says the enemy's gate is down, and he trains his entire team to always treat it as such, and as a result, they create smaller targets for the enemy in these war games. It's the same concept here, guys. It's the same concept. Think outside the box. The enemy's gate is down means that slot 2, 4, 6 is a fluid concept. So if you ask somebody how to rune a monster and they say speed, crit damage, attack, you don't have to hold that as gospel. You just have to know that your monster needs to have lots of speed, lots of crit damage, and lots of attack, and then figure out which stats that you want to target based on the quality of your own runes. Now, all this brings us back to where we were talking about the different stats that you can and cannot get on any specific slot. So slot 3 cannot give us attack, which means that realistically, for a really, really high attack monster, which is basically one where we're using attacks slot 2 and slot 6, you can only get your attack substats from slots 1, 4, and 5. And so since you only have 3 runes to get additional attack substats, you at most are going to be able to get about 120 to 140% additional attack. However, that monster that needs all this attack also needs crit rate, crit damage, and with a few exceptions is going to need a little bit at least of speed. Maybe not HP or defense if we're talking about like some sort of turn 1 team, but then if we're talking turn 1, they probably need more speed. So ultimately, we can only get so many stats on our runes. Now what happens here is if you take a slot 1 rune, for example, let's say a Fatal slot 1 rune or a Rage slot 1 rune, which is a set that's going to go on your biggest nukers anyway, and then you get this rune that might have speed, HP, resistance, and accuracy, and it does not have crit rate, crit damage, or attack, you've basically taken your primary source of offense, your slot 1 rune where you can't get defense, so you almost by default want to get the most offense from it, and you've taken a rune that has no offense. So that rune has very limited value. It's mostly only going to work for supports and to a certain extent bruisers. Conversely, on slot 3, it's the same thing in reverse. We cannot get attack on slot 3, so this is the rune where we need to make up our crit rate and our crit damage, because those are just ungrindable stats that if they're on our slot 1, we can't get the grindable attack and all that, HP and speed and all that. So on your slot 3, you want to have higher crit rate and crit damage for your nukers. Obviously, we want high speed for everybody. High speed is just a great thing. But if it's going to be on a nuker, such as this Pungbek right here, you can see when we have crit damage and crit rate, we only have 2 grindable stats. And so from that point, we're going to have speed, and then we have an option of HP or defense. If I have this Rage rune, again, slot 3, that's HP, defense, resistance, and accuracy, that's basically a support rune, and it's not even a good support rune because supports need speed more than anything else. So because it's a support rune on a Rage set, and it doesn't have speed, it's a nearly worthless rune. Even if it's a legend rune with max rolls, if it has HP, defense, resistance, and accuracy on this slot 3, I mean, you just aren't going to find anywhere to use it. It may be amazing efficiency. It may have tons of stats, but it just isn't going to work on most monsters because it's a Rage rune. So ultimately, you want to think about the value of the slot that you're looking at and how it correlates to the set that you're looking at. So when we talk about that example I just gave, it doesn't make sense as a Rage rune, but if we talk about that same example as a Violent rune, now Violent runes are more universal. They don't go on just our nukers. They go on our supports. They also go on our bruisers. They go on our setups, our strippers. They go on every monster, right? So Violent runes are, or monsters that want Violent runes are often the monsters that also want the most efficiency. Efficiency, by the way, it's not the be-all, end-all, but efficiency is the best way to quickly evaluate how many stats are on a rune. And that's literally what it is. Efficiency is just telling you how many stats are on this rune. So the higher efficiency runes, that doesn't mean they always fit right on every monster. I could have 130% efficiency slot 5 that's just super high HP, defense, speed, and it makes no sense for a Lucian. My Lucian just wants 30 crit damage there. He wants the 75% efficiency rune that just has crit damage, attack, flat attack, and crit rate, right? He doesn't care about all the rest of that. But when it comes to a bruiser, a support, anything that's really wanting violent runes, that 130% slot 5 is amazing for them. So keep in mind that when you're thinking about your runes, you want to think about if the rune makes sense in context of both the set and the slot that it's in. So rage runes, we don't really need support runes all that much. Maybe if it's like a quad roll speed, we'll use it as a broken set for an attack bar booster or something. But for the most part, you don't really need many support runes out of Rage and Fatal. For the most part, you don't need many bruiser runes. Excuse me, you don't need many damage dealer nuker runes out of Endure. But you're going to take kind of your all-purpose runes from your Violent. You want your fast runes from Swift, and high efficiency can work in Swift as well. So again, just kind of tie it all back into slot and set. Now, this brings us to what I've been talking about for weeks on stream, which is the value of crit rate, accuracy, and resistance runes. But before we do, I'm really excited to tell you that today's video has been sponsored by the Huawei App Gallery. Please don't jump ahead, guys. I know I jump ahead when I see sponsored content, but here's the deal. Especially if you watch my channel, you watch my streams, you know I'm always talking about ways to save money on in-game purchases. Of course, assuming you're not free to play, right? If you spend money in the game like I do, I'm obviously not free to play. Then I'm always looking for ways to save money on my purchases, and that's what this is about today. You can save 25% or more on all of your in-game purchases in Summoner's War. So check it out, guys. This is the cool thing. A lot of countries that do not currently have any other available discounts that I know of now have the ability to get the benefits from the Huawei App Store. So for example, if you're in the UK, New Zealand, or Ireland, through March 15th, there is a promotion going where you get 20% back of everything that you spend on Summoner's War back in what they call Huawei points. And Huawei points are just like credit card points, right, guys? Now, I've got 2 download links in the video description, guys. You'll be helping me out if you use one of those links and try this promotion out if you want to test out the App Store. So because I'm in the US, I actually use the up to down link. And then, of course, if you have access to just download directly from Huawei, there's a link, direct download link in the description of this video as well. And of course, you'll also note that I'm in Nox right now. I'm in my emulator, and I did just to test it out. I set my location to the UK, and I had absolutely no problem with that either. So it worked just great in my Nox emulator. I believe it would work just fine in BlueStacks as well. And then we can come over here to the install page. We go ahead and install our Summoner's War. And if you click through, look what pops up right away. It's Summoner's War UK campaign 0209. So if we click on the campaign right here, it's going to show us how to get our coupon and our cashback points. And it's really just as simple as that. It brings us right back here, 20% points back, and then claim one of each of 3 coupons. So you can actually get 7 euros off of a 29 euro pack. You can get 12 euros off of a 49 euro pack, and then 25 euros off of a 100 euro pack. And those discounts are slightly in New Zealand because they're based off New Zealand dollars. The numbers are different, but it's still right about the same, about 25% of a discount and then your additional 20% points back. So guys, just a quick piece of math right here. We have 58% crit rate on this slot 4 rune. Now, that gives my Van Cleef 97 crit rate. He starts with 15 by default, so I've only got 24 crit rate through subs. Now, the thing with crit rate runes is that obviously a crit rate rune is usually not going to work on a monster that must one-shot something. So we still have rage showing over here, right? I'm never going to put a crit rate rune on my Bulldozer or on my Lucian or on my Pungbek because those monsters need to do as much damage as they possibly can. But lots of other monsters, especially bruisers that are designed for longer fights, such as my Vigor, such as my Ciara, such as my Anavel even. These are monsters that are meant for longer fights where being able to do more damage over the course of 5, 10, 20 rounds of fighting is going to swing things in my favor. But these are all monsters. I mean, like literally, Vigor, Ciara, Anavel, 3 of the most stat-hungry monsters in the game. They need every single stat in the deck. Well, the thing is, from a value perspective, 58% crit rate is more value than pretty much any other slot 4. Now, what do I mean by this when I say value? Well, consider that 58 crit rate is 9.66 max rolls. The only stat that offers you more value than that is going to be crit damage, which is also slot 4. Crit damage, giving you 80 crit damage, is actually 11.4 rolls. And when I say a roll, I'm just talking about stats on a rune, right? Like, a rune can start with up to 6 crit rate, and it can start with up to 7 crit damage, and then you can add up to 6 crit rate and up to 7 crit damage per roll. So the two highest value runes that you can get are actually slot 4 crit rate and crit damage offers higher value. However, if you don't crit, then crit damage has diminishing value. All of that 80 crit damage doesn't come into play at all when you miss a crit. So there is a little bit of a diminished value unless you get your monster up to at least 80-85% crit. If your monster's below 80 crit, you're not going to crit every time, right? Even if he's below 90 crit, you're not going to crit every time. So that means that you have to make up crit rate through subs. Now, if your monster has 15 crit rate, doesn't awaken into crit rate, that means you have to make up 70 crit rate off your 6 rune slots through subs. Now, assuming the average roll is 5, because the range is 4 to 6, that means you need 14 rolls of crit rate, which is basically just under 2.5 rolls per rune. Your average rune has to be about 13 crit rate. Now, when we're talking about 2.5 rolls per rune, that's stats that could have been going somewhere else that are not. That's speed, that's HP, that's defense. Equally important, crit rate is a non-grindable stat. So if we put crit rate on a slot that also has, for example, crit damage, now we only have 2 grindable stats instead of 3. In addition, a lot of times our monsters need accuracy. Once again, non-grindable stats. So the more non-grindable stats we use in smaller quantities, the more we're giving up. This crit rate on the Pungbek rune, for example, I gemmed in crit rate as opposed to HP. Now I got a max roll legend here, that's 9 crit rate. A max rolled and max grinded HP is 23. That is just shy of 3 rolls. So I get 1.5 rolls on a max gemmed crit rate as opposed to just about 3 rolls of stats on HP. Now, let's think about this in context of a Vigor, for example. A lot of you may be using slot 4 HP over slot 4 crit damage on your Vigors. So a slot 4 HP is worth 63% HP. And then you're getting your crit rate through subs. So let's say your Vigor only has 70 crit rate. He's got 55 added, which is about 9 rolls. So we're talking about giving up on 6 of your runes 23% HP. For example, if you were to gem in, you know, a max gem, max grind HP. So we're giving up 138% HP in order to get 70 crit rate. Now, if we go with this crit rate slot 5 and put HP on all of those other runes instead, you're getting to the same crit rate and you're finishing with much, much, much higher HP because you got more value out of your slot 4. Now, accuracy runes, they follow pretty much the exact same logic that I just discussed with crit rate. The only difference is you're not getting quite as much value. You get 8 rolls off your accuracy rune instead of 10, so it's not quite as much, but everything else I talked about applies the same. However, one other big thing is that your accuracy rune right here is quad grindable, where an HP rune is only triple grindable. So although you're only getting 8 rolls in the accuracy itself, you can assume that you're getting just about an extra roll and a half from the additional grindable substat on the rune, which now puts us back to 9.5 rolls, which now makes this one of the most valuable runes in aspect of the total stats that you're getting. Resistance rune is the exact same thing as accuracy, max 64 resistance. Resistance as a stat typically has far less value than accuracy or crit rate, so I wouldn't advise using resistance runes as often, but they do have their purposes. For example, Bastet awakens into resistance. If you have a super fast slot 6 resistance rune with lots of substats, you can make a really beefy Bastet with max res. Also, there are some trap defenses that you may run into on occasion. For example, in G3 meta right now, we occasionally see some max resistance Odins because he awakens into resistance, so you drop a slot 6 resistance with tons and tons of attack percent. You know, imagine a triple roll. Triple roll could be 32%, but let's call it a low triple roll. 28% with a 10% grind. So you have a slot 6 resistance, triple rolled, has 38% accuracy in the sub. you're trading 25% attack for max resistance. Now the thing is, max resistance on monsters that people expect to have max resistance has further less value. So we all expect a Triana or Harmonia to have max resistance, and as such, we bring in max accuracy counters. I bring in a max accuracy Ganymede to reset that Triana. We generally do not expect an Odin or a Commune to be max accuracy, so we may be more likely to make a mistake to be max resistance, so we may be more likely to make a mistake and bring in a monster that only has 30 accuracy, which is normally plenty, against that max resistance Odin, and then we just get shut down. So generally speaking, your slot 6 resistance runes should go on a monster that you would normally build with resistance, or on a monster that you're building as kind of a trap. It's like the old school triple HP fangs that would act as dozer traps, right? Except in this case, we're making a resistance trap with a monster that awakens into resistance. Savannah is another example. It's like an attack monster that awakens into resistance. It's a way to use those super, super efficient resistance runes that would not have necessarily fit somewhere else. Now, the bottom line here, guys, don't run out and throw crit rate runes on your Lucians. Please, don't run out and throw accuracy runes on your Vigors. Please, just because they are more efficient doesn't mean that they're right for every monster. But when you think about things in that fluid concept that I talked about earlier, when you think about stat targets, a monster like Van Cliff, I need him to have 85 accuracy, including his artifacts. So, slot 6 accuracy is just as good or better than running a whole bunch of accuracy subs on all my other runes because I'm trading off lots of other stats. This guy is super, super stat hungry. As it is, I wish I had more crit damage and more attack. And he's already, this is my most efficient rune set. It's 110%. And I still feel like he doesn't have enough stats. So, when you have these crazy stat-hungry monsters, and you think about it just in context of these are my stat targets, then the crit rate, accuracy, and resistance runes are generally the 3 best runes to help you achieve those stat targets in the game. What's most important here is just remembering that you have a target for every single stat. So, if you throw that accuracy slot 6 on, but you can't get enough effective HP, or you can't get enough attack or crit rate or whatever it is, then it's not the right time to use that rune. But if throwing that slot 6 on allows you to reach, throwing that slot 6 accuracy or that slot 4 crit rate allows you to reach all of your other targets, then it is the right time to use the rune. Now, one last thing we're going to close out on here, and that is the value of crit damage. So, although it is a meme that I don't value crit damage, it's actually a true meme that I don't value crit damage that much, I don't disvalue it either. I think crit damage is really important, but along the same concept of fluidity, I think the actual damage that my monster does, the end result, is what I care about most. So when I run my builds, I typically load up the optimizer, as you can see in the background, and then I run my builds asking for both crit rate and crit damage runes. And this allows me to see what the final damage output is. So if we were running a build on our Tyrannus right here, I look for speed defense, crit rate, crit damage defense, but I come over here into damage options and I set everything up to look at exactly how much damage I'm going to do with a defense buff and a defense break on an enemy with an average 1200 defense and max skill ups, and I set up for like an average hit on a water monster. And that means I'm adding 15 crit rate right here. I hit apply. And then when I look at my builds, you guys will see, if I sort by total damage output, these are all crit damage builds right here. Every one of these is a crit damage build. But as I start to narrow things down with the stats that are important to me, so if I say I want 150,000 effective HP, not speed, that's a really fast Tyrannus. If I say I want 200 speed and 150,000 effective HP and an 85 crit rate, and I narrow this down, all of a sudden, all those crit damage builds went away. Because I can't get to the stats that I want across the board in a crit damage build on him. But here's the important thing. If we look on the right-hand column, we see that he does 26,000 damage. If I actually, and I'm actually sorted by damage here, right? So we see he does 26,000 damage on this crit rate build. If I ditch in those things I just added and we hit apply again, we're going to see that the highest crit damage build is 33,000. So that's a lot more. That's 25% more, but it's not as much more as probably a lot of people would initially assume when you look at this being 183 crit damage and the other builds being half of that. And that's because Tyrannus does defense scaling damage, so all of that added defense, we're at 2380 in this build, and we're at 2582 in this build. So that extra defense that we're getting is helping to boost our damage just like the extra crit damage did, but the difference is the defense serves a dual purpose because it also makes us tankier, it helps us live longer, and it helps us avoid being defense broken by Savannas, which is again what I use Tyrannus to counter a lot. So there is just kind of a trade-off. You can only put so many stats on a rune and on a monster, and you have to prioritize by which stats you want and then set up those target stats and just look at everything in a fluid environment of I don't care what the slot 2, 4, and 6 is as long as I reach the stats I want. Now conversely, maybe I'm building a Daphnis and I wanted to snipe a Ritesh. Well, the average Ritesh has 60,000 HP, give or take, at least the average G3 one does. So when I sort by damage here, and I get 53,000, I say, okay, the minimum I can do, so if the average Ritesh has actually 60,000, the first 30% is gone through the first part of your skill, so what you really need to do is about 41,000 just to have a little buffer. So my minimum damage threshold on Daphnis is 41,000. For him to serve his role, he has to kill first turn, whereas that's not necessarily the case with Tyrannus, right? So at this point, I'm putting a 41,000 minimum damage. And again, this is all about stat target. Now that does actually come up with some crit rate runes just because they have some absurd attack. But I still value the overall damage that he does more. I want Daphnis actually to be able to overkill. I don't care if Tyrannus overkills because if he misses a crit or misses a kill, he's not going to die the next turn. Daphnis is. So in this case, what happens if Daphnis doesn't strip? Well, we take off this defense break, we hit apply, and all of a sudden we see that those builds that we just had, they don't do enough damage anymore. We can't find any builds at all that are doing 41,000 damage without that defense break. And so we know that we need the highest damage build that we can get with Daphnis in order to reach that stat threshold, that target. Alright guys, so that's going to be it for today's video. This was a long video, but as always guys, I really appreciate you watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, hope you found it useful, and we'll see you next time. Hey guys, if you're still with me to this point, then that means that you probably liked the video, found it entertaining, or even better, both. So please smash the like button, hit the subscribe button, and leave a comment down below because those things help the channel grow, and more importantly, they show me that the video is useful, and that's the whole reason I do this in the first place.